Ko Bilhaba Takawangawa, he kaiaka hou e te oho pairua ki Matatu Aotearoa. Welcome everybody. My name is Bill. I work as a lead advisor and the teacher capability and collaboration team here at the Council. And welcome to today's Inclusive Education and ITE Symposium, which will be running from 10 until midday today with a short break in the middle. So I'm going to do a few housekeeping pieces just to get us going, and then we're into the mahi. So for the purposes of the symposium, can you please make sure that your microphone is off? It's really nice if your camera is on, because then we have a sense of being in a room together. Can you please get the chat going and introduce yourself through the chat? Sort of your name, your role, your organisation, and possibly where in the country you are, if that's not clear. That's really nice for people to pick up. And we can let you know in advance that this meeting has been recorded, and that the notes, the presentation notes that you're seeing during the session, and also notes from the breakout rooms, they're going to be sent to you after this event. So a lot of people want to know that. And just before we get going, we're going to start with the council karakia. So we've got a slide for that. This visual represents the whare concept, which really is, you can see the four values either side of this whare, and the whare represents that we all belong to the profession and we each have a place in this dimension. Here is the karakia. Tu matatia, tu ramatia, tu tuapapa o tu matatu Aotearoa. Ki runga, ki rarau, ki uta, ki tai, koia ko, te manakitanga, te whanaunatanga, te pono ma te whakamana e te ako. Homie, uie, tai ki e. And it's over. I'm pleased to introduce Kelly Turner, who will give us some more information about herself, and she's going to tell us about the event today.
I think inclusion might be like something to do with like including people.
It means don't leave them to the side, let everyone take a part of it.
Not leaving them out all the time.
Bullying them, play with you and not be a bully.
Yeah. Sometimes my friends go away to talk to someone and I don't know where they are because I can't see them.
It's hard sometimes. We go and join in with the hearing group and we don't understand what they're saying, or if the teacher's there, the teacher might be running a session and we don't know what the teacher's explained to the group. So what happens if we don't have an interpreter, we don't really understand what's going on. We tend to back off and not get involved.
Every disabled people has a different disability, and like for me, I'm in a wheelchair, but I still play sports.
Inclusion is good because I have friends.
I think it's important that everyone's treated equally because it's about respecting people, respecting each other and their differences. A big thing for me is having respect for people and not teasing people. I think if communication breaks down, then you need to be willing to help people and not tease them, but to help each other. I think if we all help each other and work as people together rather than individuals, it'll be a better thing.
Sometimes I would just wish that people who don't have disabilities to like understand and like help them, not be like, oh, she's in a wheelchair and laughing at.
It's important to hear our voices.
This is Kieran.
To my little brother, he should really be able to do what he wants to.
In shopping centres and malls, I don't really know where everything is because I might not be able to read this, the words of the shop. Like there might be an app called Shop Finder, and you could say where you are and what shop you're looking for, and then you could just hold this and there would be like this map appear.
I think definitely there should be more captioning on TV. The cartoons, for example, deaf people have no idea what happens in cartoons because, you know, there's no access. So subtitles for things like that would be important. I think if there are meetings where there are hearing and deaf people involved, there must be sign language there. If there are no deaf people there, then they can speak, you know, but if deaf people are there, then they should be signing.
There are a lot of times where I would like to go out with my friends, like to movies or something. It would make a big difference to me if I had the taxi voucher so I could go hang out with my friends.
Ooh, if everybody in the country could sign, what would I do? It's hard, I don't know. I'll have to wait and see when I've grown up. Just keep my eyes out, I guess, see what the government's got going on.
I want to be a doctor. Same, I want to be a doctor. Do accounting in banks.
Pizza job.
Don't think I'm not capable of stuff because look what I did. This is my street art, and even though I had to keep it very close to me, I still made it very detailed.
Ooh, jobs. I don't know, maybe it'd be cool to go to Carlton Deaf Education Centre? No, I'd probably work in the office or something. You know, going out and visiting the different schools, you know, seeing what's going on out there. I don't know, maybe a principal? Maybe I could become the first deaf principal?
I want to try and take risks. I don't want to just say, okay, I can't do that because I don't have good vision.
Everyone's got ideas and everyone's ideas have got something behind them.
My ideal job is like to go to the Paralympics and play for a team that represents New Zealand.
Nah, not so much those sorts of jobs, no. I think the hard thing about that would be needing an interpreter all the time. I reckon if I was at Carlton Deaf Education Centre, I'd be able to use interpreters there. Maybe with a deaf school I'd be able to go visit the building sites and stuff like that.
Having a disability may be a little bit of a disadvantage, but you can get there if you really work hard.
Some people might believe that people with disabilities shouldn't be leaders, should be down at the bottom of the hierarchy.
I think leaders should be people that people want to be leaders.
And that respects everyone, no matter if they have a disability or not.
Even if you're different, you can make a change. Even if people classify you as weird, it doesn't mean you should agree with them. You can do what you want and not what people believe you should do.
I think if we wanted things to be better in 10 years' time for the three of us, hearing people would be able to sign, the government would be able to provide funding for better buildings and make more jobs available. There would be more education for sign language, deaf people would be welcomed in, everything would be more open. My name is Brooklyn, and this is my sign name.
I'm Matt Blue. 7 and I have white hair. I'm almost the only person in my whole school who has vision impairment.
Hi, my name is Bethany, and this school has a good opportunity for disabled kids, but I wish I could go to another school with my community and friends.
I can't do reading or writing. And I have ADHD.
Everybody wants to be included!
E te ti, e te tā, e ngā iwi katoa, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Kelly tōku ingoa. My name is Kelly. Oops. My sign name is Kelly. Most of you will know I have been leading in the ITE space for the last few years, but with recent changes, I have a new 12-month contract to lead the development of an inclusive education competency framework. And I invite anyone who's here today, if this is something that interests you and you'd like to be involved in any way, then just flick me an email. So I'll ask Maya to put my email into the chat now for you all. In this area has been a really long journey. I'm a primary trained teacher, and early in my career I was drawn to the SENCO role. Later on, specialist ORS teacher and resource teacher of learning and behaviour. I completed a Masters of Specialist Teaching in 2020, and I'm focusing on ASD, sensory integration, UDL, learner agency and voice, and school whānau partnerships. I also have a lived experience or experiences. I have a 16-year-old daughter on the spectrum, and my best friend and her husband came to live with me for around 10 years so I could support them after a chronic illness left her with only 10% hearing in one ear, partially sighted and in a wheelchair. Because of her needs, I learnt New Zealand Sign Language to support her, and together we founded the first ever deaf club in Whanganui, bringing what was a very isolated and marginalised community together, some of who had developed their own sign language just to get by, due to a lack of access to education and general isolation. It was a true joy to see this group find their place in space of acceptance and develop a shared communication language, and often this led to a lot of laughter and hilarity along the way. Which brings us to the topic for today. Everybody wants to be included. I believe it is an exciting time in education as the groundswell of voices to not only enable everybody to have access, but to thrive in our education system is growing. We all have the opportunity to be change agents, to challenge ourselves and each other, to heed the words of learners like we've just heard from Brooklyn and Madeline, reimagining what is possible to create a truly equitable experience for all learners and all of society. We've got 3 presenters today to share with us, but I'd like to introduce you to our first presenters, Frian Wadia and Dane Knight. Frian is a parent of disabled children with a background in ECE education. She has founded and led many different advocacy groups. She's a bit of a Wonder Woman, actually. Today, Frian will be introducing us to Enabling Good Lives and chatting with Dane about his lived experiences of the New Zealand education system. Dane also is an active member of his community, working alongside disabled people, their whānau and service providers. So I'll hand it over now to Frian. Welcome, Frian and Dane.
Thank you, Kelly. Kia ora, morena, everyone. I'm going to get us started off with a little presentation first for the first half, and then I'm going to have the kōrero with Dane, and hopefully when we go into our breakout spaces, we get to talk a little more about EGL and what that might mean in practice. So I'll just quickly share my screen. Give me a moment. Here we go. All clear, Kelly? You can see it clearly?
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So just quickly, I'm gonna introduce myself a little bit, why I'm here. I'm here because of my children. So ko Frian Wadia tokuingwa, ko kushu me kaian me zias aku tamariki, no tamaki makaurawa hau. My kids kushu, kaian, and zios, who have a range of different disabilities, have taken me on a learning journey over the years. And so a lot of what I've learned, spaces I've been in, are because of them. And the other little bit I want to share is the spaces that are really dear to my heart. The areas of focus for me have always been inclusion and equity in education, parent support and empowerment, EGL principles, approach, and the disability rights lens to strengthen inclusive education. That's another key bit. And lastly, and I guess newfound interest in neuroscience and trauma-informed approaches in education, again, as another lever to strengthen inclusion in education. So today I'm going to be talking about EGL and education. What is EGL? EGL is Enabling Good Lives. And Enabling Good Lives is a social movement that was started off by disabled people and their whānau in New Zealand because they weren't happy with the disability systems in place. And they weren't happy with the way disabled people and their families were accessing services across the sectors. So the intention of the EGL approach was to shift the power and control, shift attitudes so that disabled people and families had greater choice and control over their lives, over their supports, and that they could aspire to a good life, a life that everybody else takes for, granted, so to speak. So that's what, EGL is, I guess, in a nutshell. Now, EGL started out, just to give you some history, it started out in about 2011. That's when the conversation started out. They came around as a result of a review of the day services, and disabled people came back. The feedback was very strong and clear that it wasn't just about changing day services or disability support services. It was changing the way Aotearoa treated disabled people. And so the EGL approach was then created. In 2013, there were 2 regions that piloted the EGL approach. One was Christchurch, one was Waikato, and both of them sort of piloted it in slightly different ways. And eventually in 2018, they took the learnings from those 2 spaces and created a EGL prototype in the Mid-Central in Palmerston North. Now, since then, a lot has happened. I'm not sure if you're sort of up to date with all the announcements in the news media. The government has committed to the rollout of EGL across the country. Now, what does that mean? So one is the EGL approach that is led by people, and then the other bit is the system transformation that the government needs to do. So there's, grassroots stuff that we can start doing as individuals, as people, in the community, and then there's stuff that government will be putting in place to respond to. So I'm hoping that from today, what we talk about, you're able to take something away and actually start working on it, in your own spaces and areas of focus. So the EGL approach right now, it can be used as a relationship and equity framework to guide the changes we want, the attitudinal shifts, and also the practical shifts in the engagement and interaction that disabled people and their families have with their communities, with the systems and with the agencies that they work with. And this includes schools, of course. So the value of EGL approach is that it is led by disabled people and whānau. So it's very clear, nothing about us without us. They're involved in everything. Anything that is EGL aligned must have disabled people's voices and whānau voices included in them. EGL subscribes to a social model of disability. What does that mean? It means that basically disability does not lie in the individual person's impairment or condition. It lies in the barriers barriers that society puts in the way of disabled people's participation in society. So that's the social model of disability. And EGL subscribes to mana, self-determination, and voice. There's actually an entire paper on mana, self-determination, and voice. If you're interested, let me know. I can forward that to you. And it is really about upholding the disabled person, the child, their families, mana, allowing them opportunities for self-determination, agency, and their voice is heard, acknowledged, and actioned as required. So that's mana, self-determination, and voice. EGL is aligned with Whanaora. Now, Whanaora approach is a really holistic, collective approach. It looks at the well-being of not just the individual, looks at the well-being of the entire whānau. And so, you know, again, when we're talking about EGL for disabled children, it includes the whānau, it includes the people who are surrounding them and supporting them. So really important to bear that in mind. EGL aligns with the rights of disabled people as stated in the UN CRPD. This is the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and it's a convention that New Zealand has signed up to. So New Zealand should be really mindful of, you know, UN CRPD articles and upholding them in everything, you know, across all the sectors and agencies. And ultimately, EGL aligns with Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the UNDRIP standards. So UNDRIP is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So really, really, you know, fabulous approach. As I've said, it aligns with so many other approaches that, you know, New Zealand is anyways expected to uphold. Now, the EGL vision is all about looking forward to a future when disabled children and adults and their families have greater choice and control over their supports and lives. It's really important. This is not just about the disability supports, the additional supports that get layered on. It's about the life, the quality of life. And they should have those opportunities to make more use of natural and universally available supports. So what does that mean? It means it's not just about paid supports. It's about looking at how can we shift the quality of life through a range of means. And the range of means could be, you know, the paid supports, but also the natural relationships and connections we build, you know, the universal design for learning that you can put in place. And making sure that everything is accessible for our disabled people and children. So EGL vision in education. What might an EGL vision in education look like? What does choice and control look like in education? So it means that there should always be that availability of opportunities. Children should have, you know, all the choices that every other child without a disability has. Having that twin track approach of mainstream first, as well as, you know, the specialist supports as needed is important. Control is all about agency, student whānau voice, you know, when you have the IEPs, when you have those even koreros and interactions, minute little interactions, you know, are you giving them space to speak what they need to say and, you know, to genuinely be heard and to express themselves without fear, without anxiety of how they may be viewed or perceived. Person-centered supports are all about accessibility and making sure that accessibility, you know, is appropriate to the needs of that individual child. So disabled children should have the opportunity to say what's important to them, how they want to be supported, where they want to be supported. As a parent, for me, it was simple things like working with the school and saying, hey, you know, I really think my child needs a teacher aide in this, you know, time at this time of the day. This is more of a priority. This is more of a need for them rather than another time that you might think is suitable or convenient, you know, for the whole process. So those little kind of things. Also, how well is the school accessible, you know? So are those person-centered approaches and supports provided across the classroom, the playground, the assemblies, you know, the camp trips? Is it all being planned? So all that kind of stuff, you know, needs to be accessible. It's not just the classroom practice that should be accessible. Lives what does EGL vision in the education space mean for our life outcomes for our children? It means that their ability skills are really focused on and grown, developed, so that they can eventually come out of school and have a job. You know, you heard the video, kids talking about being a leader, having a job. It's so important to be able to participate in the community, and to prepare children, same as any other child, you know, give them the skills, give them those opportunities to learn and grow and develop those skills. And then natural supports. What does natural supports mean? Natural support means that you actually have those same regular, you know, little connections, friendships, whether they're deep, whether they're acquaintances, you know, you have all of that happening for the child, so that in whatever context they're in, whether they're in the playground, whether they're in the classroom, they have those little moments of, you know, other peers supporting them, engaging, interacting with them naturally. I recently did an interview a few months ago, actually, with one of the disabled people, and you know, he said that he went to school in the primary sort of, you know, years without a teacher aide, and he said there were some struggles, but he said the fabulous thing was, you know, all the kids supported him and they helped out when he needed some help. And so he said, I made a lot of friends. And he said, after that, when I went to, you know, secondary school, I actually had a teacher aide, and I didn't have as many opportunities to make friendships and connections, and other kids didn't sort of interact as much. So it makes a huge difference how we you know, create those environments that are inclusive, that allow for those natural connections to happen and the natural supports to sort of, you know, develop. And then ultimately you've got the universally available supports. What does that mean? So that is all about your universal design for learning, but not just universal design for learning in the classroom. It's about how do you apply universal design principles in the playground, you know, across the school management, the school governance. How are disabled people's voices and student voices and family voices included, so that you can, you know, make sure that you're actually making the educational space universally accessible and inclusive for everyone. So those are some of the things to sort of think about when we look at, you know, EGL vision in the education space. Now, quickly I want to run through the EGL principles. We've got 8 EGL principles. They're really self-explanatory, so I won't go into much detail. Self-determination is a key one. It is all about that choice control, priorities and preferences of the disabled child. So, you know, how, as a teacher, as a principal, are you allowing time, space, opportunities, and enabling the child to have self-determination. Beginning early is about really starting off early, putting in the supports early as needed. And you know that some of the supports could be universal sort of supports, rather than having those specialist supports while you're waiting for that funding or specialist supports. So beginning early, what can you do to start supporting the child? How can you educate yourself better to support the child early on? Person-centered is all about those targeted, individualized sort of one-on-one supports that the child might need, or the specialist layer of supports. It could be, you know, equipment such as communication devices that they need, mobility, you know, equipment. So that's what person-centered sort of principle means, making sure that they're getting the individual needs met. Ordinary life outcomes, this is a huge one for our disabled children. You know, the ordinary life outcomes, such as friendships, such as attendance the full day, every day, just like every other child. You know, it doesn't happen for our disabled children often. They're only allowed a certain number of hours or certain days, or only when a teacher aide is there. Sometimes even our children have challenges like they don't have any friends. You know, everybody else gets invited in the class to a birthday party or sleepover, and you know, our kids don't. So those are the ordinary life outcomes. So really important how, as a team, can, you know, we work to make sure our children have all those opportunities for friendships, for this, upholding their rights, same rights as every other child, and eventually, that employment and community connections and all of those lovely things that should be happening, attending camps, outdoor trips, planning for that and organizing and really making sure that's all well planned. Mainstream First is about ensuring that all mainstream spaces are available and accessible to disabled people and children if they wish. In the education space, what does that mean? It means that every child in the education space has the right to, education in the mainstream. And often what I say is parents choose specialist education because of anxiety and fear of how their children will be treated in the mainstream space. And sometimes it is actually they've experienced, they've gone from mainstream to specialist. So it's really important that the choice of having mainstream education is authentic, is genuine, and that children and families are not made to feel like they don't belong there, like they should be moving, into a specialist space. So really, really important. And the other thing is, how do you create the mainstream environment and make it genuinely accessible, genuinely inclusive, so meet all needs, whether it's mobility needs, sensory needs of our children, and make sure they can sort of access that. Then you have mana enhancing. Mana enhancing is all about making sure, sorry, that was my bad. Mana enhancing is all about making sure the inherent abilities, skills, talents of our children are valued, are showcased and highlighted and focused on, rather than the deficit sort of, medical-based approach that often is taken with disability. So really, really important that we are focusing on the strengths and using a strengths-based approach and building those strengths for our children. And I guess some teachers do it easily, some don't. So take some guidance from, colleagues, from parents, from other people who know the child well, if you're struggling with that. So really important that, that's how we view the child, with the strengths-based lens. Easy to use, it says it all, make sure all, whether it's assessment, processes, systems, resources, curriculum, whatever it is, it's all easy to use and access for our kids. And relationship building. Relationship building is all about making sure that there are those authentic connections, respectful, collaborative relationships between disabled children and their families and the professionals, educators who work alongside them. So fabulous 8 principles, again, you can apply them. And what I say is, don't try to apply those principles just in the classroom practice, just in the act of engaging, interacting, teaching, learning with the child. Make sure you apply those principles in the planning stages, in the organizational stages. It's really, really important for teachers to understand that. Now, there's lots more slides. What I'm going to do is Kelly will pass on these slides to you, so you'll get some more information. We don't have a lot of time to go through them today, but what I want to do is I want to have a korero with Dane quickly and sort of look at it. Just before I do that, 5 key characteristics of EGL. Now, I want to highlight, of the 5, there's only 1 characteristic which is dependent on what the government starts to do, the system transformation that the government is responsible for, which is cross-government, individualized and portable funding. This is about making funding really easy, all funding from different agencies coming to one place, and disabled people, children, families being able to use that, in a streamlined manner, and less, I guess, red tape, bureaucracy, and sort of paperwork for families, so to speak, and disabled people. But everything else, so this is the only thing that the system has to change, and we need to sort of, I guess, wait for that to happen. But everything else, the self-directed planning and facilitation, this is about keeping the child's voice, family voice center, IEPs, planning, all of that, making sure their voice is coming through. Person in wider context, again, making sure we're teaching our children, supporting our children, considering everything that they want, they bring, and their vision for that good life, and working towards that and supporting them with all of that, including those natural supports friendships. Strengthening families and whānau, this is about building the capacity for families and whānau. Again, this is something, you know, we do again in our communities. How do you have those conversations with whānau? How do you empower them? How do you let them know their children's rights and, you know, create opportunities for them to speak up and participate in different spaces, and ultimately community building to develop natural support. So this is what we're looking at. How do you create cultures, inclusive school culture, other people in your community, other parents in your community? How do you educate them? How do you educate the other agencies, the other professionals who come to your school to work with your children? And how do you tell them you've got to start working in an EGL aligned way? Okay, so those are those characteristics. Just there's a little bit about legislation and rights frameworks. Again, if you're interested, there's specific sections that I've cited, specific sort of acts that I've cited. So if you're interested in the disability rights space, you can go through those slides and have a look at them. There's some concepts and perspectives to consider when you are embedding EGL. What is inclusion? You know, really, really important. Inclusion is something that's often misstated, misunderstood. So, you know, there's research that shows, and according to me, General Comment 4 by UNCRPT is the gold standard for understanding inclusion in education. Choice and control, again, what does it mean? Some questions for you to answer. Community participation, ordinary life outcomes, what does that mean? You know, a few things to think about for us as teachers, educators, and people supporting our kids. That twin track approach, you know, the universal natural supports, what could those look like? Again, you know, these are questions you can actually discuss with your teams and with your colleagues. And human rights approach, what does a human rights approach mean? You know, when you make decisions, do you think about the human rights approach and make those decisions, or are you just blindly following rules or, you know, processes and systems and ways of doing things that are just there, you know, going on from ages? Equity is a key concept, again, to understand what does equity mean. You know, everybody may need sort of different levels of resourcing to be able to access equal outcomes, and the impact of life that you know can occur with the good practice that you allow for and the EGL aligned practice. So lots of questions. Kelly, I think you put those questions down for later. So I will stop sharing my screen now, and I'm gonna quickly introduce Dane to you. So kia ora, Dane. Thank you for coming along.
Morning, everyone.
So I met Dane first when I had sort of started talking about enabling good lives in the Coastal Bay of Plenty, and this was my other hat, parent-to-parent board member hat, and we were looking at getting conversations about EGL going in the Coastal Bay of Plenty community, which included parents and disabled people and service providers. And so Dane has come along, I guess, on that journey. I've stepped back now, and the community has gone on with those you know, conversations about understanding EGL, unpacking EGL, and what that could mean in their region, and what changes do disabled people and families want to see in that, you know, Coastal Bay of Plenty region, you know, through the EGL approach. So on to you, Dane. Dane, would you like to introduce yourself quickly a little bit about your journey, history as a disabled person, and then if you sort of share a little about your educational experiences, that would be fabulous. You know, what was EGL aligned? What was not EGL aligned? You know, when you went through your education as a disabled student.
Morning, everyone. My name's Dane. I've got cerebral palsy. So that's the disability that affected me sort of growing up and going to school. But I was mainly mainstream educated. And yeah, I found it to be really quite a rewarding experience being involved in the mainstream sector, because you know, a lot of people that do have disabilities don't get that opportunity to have that experience, or their whole schooling experience can be more negative because it's seen as, oh, I'm different from everyone else. So yeah, I enjoyed the whole mainstream experience. The EGL principles weren't really something that I knew about growing up, but then looking back on my experience that I had going to school, and then after that university as well, I kind of look back at them and I realized, yeah, they quite a lot did apply to my experience. And yeah, I really just had quite a good journey going through up until now, really.
Dane, can you expand a little bit on what made that journey good? Because I mean, it's absolutely fantastic that you've had that rewarding experience in mainstream, and I think you know, the way you said you were really fortunate meant that you realize not a lot of disabled people had that right or that opportunity upheld for them. So what made it really rewarding for you being in that mainstream space?
Well, I was the only person with a physical disability at my school, but everyone, all the students, they all made an effort to include me in absolutely everything we did. Like I went on school camps with the help of a teacher aide. We did all sorts of cool stuff like snow caving, abseiling, you know, just, you know, good, cool stuff like that, that a lot of people with disabilities don't get to do on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, I found it quite easy to make friends. You know, everyone was quite welcoming. You know, obviously it's difficult to make friends, but in the grand scheme of things, you know, it was quite good, and people were always willing to give me a hand with anything that I needed. And I think when you're at school as a person with a disability, it's quite difficult to ask for help. So when people are there willing to give it to you, it's you know, it makes it a lot easier because you don't have to step out of that comfort zone and acknowledge that, okay, I do need help. So yeah, that was one of the reasons why I think it was good for me to go to a mainstream school.
Fabulous. Then tell me a little bit about were there experiences that weren't fully EGL aligned? Because it sounds like you've had, on the whole, a really positive experience. And from what you've said, the fact that you could participate at camp, the fact that you could do so many things, in my head, I'm going, it means teachers were prepared. It means teachers had planned for this. It didn't happen by accident. It wasn't like you went along on camp, let's go and, you know, we'll see how it goes. Obviously, there was thought put into it. There was planning put into it. And I think this is one of the key things that I get frustrated with, because sometimes people think inclusion is what happens on the spur, how they treat a child, or, you know, how they interact, engage with a child. But it's not just that. It actually takes, you know, real planning and effort behind the scenes to allow that full inclusion to happen. So tell me, were you aware of any of that sort of stuff that happened behind the scenes? What was the relationship with, you know, that your parents had with the school? Did any of that sort of impact?
It must have done. I went to it was a boarding school, so my parents weren't physically around, but you know, I'm sure they did liaise a lot with the teachers to help make sure that my experience was as good as it could be. But as far as what I was aware of going on behind the scenes, yeah, there wasn't a lot. But I do think one of the things that does make a difference, because a lot of the disabilities, you know, obviously the capabilities of students are different. So I think that when my teachers sort of got to know me and understand what my capabilities were, they were able to help make better decisions as to what help I needed and where.
Yes. That's fabulous. So when they got to know you, were you given opportunities to speak up and share what you thought, what you wanted, what you needed, or how things might work differently or better for you? Was there space created for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think even after just talking for a few minutes, I think most people here will realize that I can talk the back legs off a donkey. but yeah, I was definitely given a voice, and I just felt included during every stage of that process. You know, whether it was something that they were offering me that maybe perhaps I didn't need, or you know, whether it was something that I didn't have that I did need. I've always felt comfortable to go to my teachers and say, look, this might make things better.
Yes, look, that's fabulous, Dane. Really, really fabulous. So I've got children, you know, of my 3 children, one speaks fluently, communicates fluently. My oldest is a non-speaker. And my second one, I call him a total communicator. He has some words, some signs, you know, and has a communication device. And it's been amazing. I've had to learn how to use different ways to give them choices and to have their voice heard. And sometimes it's easy enough, like for Kayan, it's very simple and easy. I can give him hands and I can go, do you want this or you want that, you know, and I'll say the name and he'll point, and that's fabulous. For Kushru, he's got a device, but he doesn't communicate very effectively. So we've actually had to do lots of object referencing. So when I ask him, where do you want to go? I will do things like I will get the countdown card, loyalty card, or a countdown bag. So he sees the symbol, and then I'll get, you know, a warehouse bag or, you know, symbol, or put it up on a screen, and I'll say, which one do you want to go? Where do you want to go? You know, so he's actually making choices. And I've really had to think about it. And to be very honest, I didn't do it much as when they were younger, but as they've grown, I've become very conscious that I have to create those choices, you know, for them. They're in college now and they need those opportunities as well to make those decisions and have their voice heard. So you're right, depending on the disability of the child, you've got to think about, you know, how you create those spaces and opportunities for voices. So that's fabulous. Quickly, can you tell me what was not EGL aligned? And, you know, what could have been better? What were the experiences that sort of, you know, you thought, that could have been done better, or, you know, this wasn't quite the way I would have liked it?
Well, I think just the EGL principles in general, they're quite hard to get into when you're younger. So the beginning early part, while it is very important, it's quite difficult from the disabled person's point of view, because they're not quite sure how to communicate what they need at that younger age. So I think that beginning early principle is definitely a tough one in the earlier stages to implement. But as you get older, that whole process starts to get better and you become more aware of what you need. And I think one of the things that I'm noticing now is to be more accepting of actually needing help. So now, for example, with me living independently, I had a cleaner just to come around, and you know, they'd help me with the vacuuming and things like you know, mopping the floors, which is things that I can do, but they would obviously take a lot longer for me to do them rather than someone else. So I think being accepting of help is a lot is very important as well.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, isn't it, Dane? So my association was mostly with children and families for many years. And in the recent years, I've been on the National EGL Leadership Group, and I've started engaging a lot more with disabled people, adults, you know. And what I've learned is that I don't have to always just jump to helping people, no matter how well-meaning I am. I still need to, I guess, respect their abilities, their capabilities, and check in with them about whether they want help or not, how they want help, you know. So instead of just going ahead and doing something because I think, oh, you're in a wheelchair, or this might be hard for you, I'll ask and I'll say, you know, how can I help you? Or what can I do? Or can I do anything for you? And so I ask so that, you know, it creates space for them to sort of, you know, ask for that help if they need it, but also I'm not jumping and I'm not assuming and making presumptions that they can't do something. So I think that's a big thing. And the other thing I've learned recently, through my engagement with disabled people, adults, is the dignity of risk, the same risk that everybody else takes, all other kids take. Sometimes as a parent, I've realized I haven't afforded my children that risk. I've kind of, we sometimes tend to be risk averse with our disabled children. What was that like for you? Did you have opportunities to take those risks and, learn through failures and fall and hurt yourself and all of that kind of stuff? What was your experience around that dignity of risk concept?
I definitely felt that growing up. So I have two sisters. They don't have a disability in the main sense of the word. And quite often I did feel like there was a little bit of a double standard that would go on. Just nothing major, but I did find that my parents tended to say, "Oh no, Dane, you won't be doing that." Particularly, as I say, when I was younger. But as you get older, you do have to learn. So I definitely fell over plenty of times, try to do the same things that my sisters were doing or my friends were doing. But I think just getting out there and being able to give it a go and see what your capabilities are, no matter what your disability is a very important thing to be able to do.
Yes, you're right. And I think I'm guilty of it as a mother, trying to be too protective. And often somebody else has said, "Oh, let him do it," or, "Oh, come on, just let him give it a go." And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And, hesitantly, I've sort of let that, risk sort of, be taken. But it's so important, isn't it? And I think what I feel as a parent is the times when my kids have taken risks in the school space, teachers have, created that opportunity, safe space, but they can take the risks, has been when I've had those good connections, relationships with them. And when they know my child really well, it's allowed us to have that opportunity and, to explore and to push the boundaries with our kids. So it's so important, isn't it, for teachers to know the student, like you said, really well, get to know them, listen to them, hear them out, and then also allow for that risk-taking and exploring and learning to happen. So
yeah, exactly. Everyone's needs are different, but I think that when you do build those good relationships there, it enables the disabled person to have ordinary life outcomes in later life, because they've tried doing things or they've had those experiences at an earlier stage, so that when they're older, they know, "Oh, I can do this," or "I can't do this because I've tried it before." So.
Absolutely. One last question, Dane, and this is about reasonable accommodations in education. One of the things I'm finding is, there seems to be no understanding of what reasonable accommodations in education could mean. Okay. And what do you think reasonable accommodation in the education space could mean? You've had a reasonably good experience. So tell me a little bit about what do you think those examples of reasonable accommodation in your lived experience, in the education space were?
So when I was at school, my school was on quite a bit of land. So it was on about 30 acres of land. So I had they gave me a mobility scooter so that I could get to all my classes on time. And I also got a lift key, which enabled me to get to class without having to climb up the stairs, which was nice. But yeah, I think that reasonable accommodation is a very important thing for schools to recognize, because as we've said, people with disabilities have different capabilities, so enabling them to have as normal of an experience as possible by making some building alterations, or it might be something else that the school needs to put in place to make it easier. It definitely needs to be more widespread, I believe.
Thanks, Dane. I think over the years, the accessibility for people with mobility challenges seems to be getting a bit better. But one of the things that I still know a lot of our kids, neurodivergent kids in particular, struggle with are those sensory adaptations and accommodations. And I think, you know, we've got a long way to go, unfortunately, around those reasonable accommodations for sensory needs and other learning needs. So I think somehow we've got to start, you know, talking about reasonable accommodations, not just for physical mobility and accessibility purposes, but also, you know, other sensory learning sort of, you know, needs and accessibility as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's a lot more difficult for people in those kind of sectors to make those changes for people with, you know, sensory disabilities or other types of disabilities. Because when you can see something, it's a lot easier to say, oh, maybe I can fix it like this. So with me having a physical disability, it's a lot easier for people to say, oh, if I do this, you know, it's going to make it easier. Whereas if someone has a disability that you maybe can't see or a sensory issue, people are a bit more confused as to how we can help them have a better educational experience.
Absolutely.
So there definitely does need to be a lot of improvement there. But you know, hopefully they get there in the not too distant future. But yeah, there's got to be a lot of work done, I believe, in that sector to make it easier for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dane. Look, really, really appreciate you coming and sharing your lived experiences, your perspectives, and good luck with all the EGL community development work that's happening in the Coastal Bay of Plenty, and all the best with that. So thank you. Thank you so much. Kelly, back to you now. Thank you for the opportunity for us to share.
Kia ora, Fran and Dane. It's Bill here again. It's my pleasure to acknowledge that totally fascinating first half to our session. I've got so many takeaways. I didn't know much about EGL. Now I know quite a lot more to learn. I'm learning that, you know, it's both, you know, top down and bottom up, and that we should do our part. The bottom up is probably more important than the top down. I just love the idea about choice, about control, about, you know, that's what we all want, isn't it? And this idea of dignity of risk, I thought that was a terrific idea too, which is once again, you know, what we all need in life. Dane, your account of your schooling and the way that you became consciously aware of how, you know, EGL operates for your life and for all of our lives was terrific. Thank you both. We have now got a 5-minute break. After 5 minutes, you can go away and do what you have to do. And after 5 minutes, Kelly's going to introduce our next speaker. So see you in 5 minutes, which is exactly 11 o'clock. Cool.
Thank you, Bill. Chief Advisor for the MOE. And today she will be joining us to share the emerging work in Te Mātaiaho, which reinforces the values of diversity and inclusion through a focus on positive, inclusive relationships, a sense of belonging for all, and the promotion of diversity as ordinary and expected. So really look forward to hearing from you. Welcome, Julie.
Oh, kia ora koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Canoblis te maunga, ko Hunter te awa, no Orangeaho, no Denmark, Germany, me Scotland, aku tipuna, ke Martinborough, taku kainga, ko Julie Hook, taku ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Well, kia ora, and thank you. As I indicated when I did that brief introduction, I hail from Australia. I grew up in New South Wales, in the Hunter Valley, and then in the Central West. So I acknowledge my awa and maunga. I've been in New Zealand coming up, must be 12 years now, which is a long time. And I am quite old now, but I have been in education all my life, in teaching, teacher education, curriculum and so forth. And for me, what I'm aiming to share is really part of one of the greatest privileges that I've had the opportunity to be part of, and that has been through the work on the refresh of the New Zealand curriculum, Te Mātaiaho. And I know I've got some colleagues here, and I see Jude, you're part of this group as well. And so if we could just, am I controlling the slides? Yes. So I'm going to start with the karakia for the refresh of the New Zealand curriculum for Te Mātaiaho. Mātaiaho tahunui, Mātaiaho taharoa, hei takapau wānanga, hei horanei. This karakia, or really an overarching whakatauki, was gifted by Dr. Wayne Nata, and I'm sure many of you would have been part of presentations around Te Mātaiaho. My intention isn't to do the same, but to really provide a bit of a deeper lens. Just going to change the slide. Oh, there we go. So my intention today is to really put an inclusive lens on the work that has been undertaken. We call it emerging. It's still in process, and I think the challenge that it lays down is how do we take the aspirations that have been laid out in Te Mātaiaho to make them real, to make them evident, and to really support our schools, our kura, our school leaders, kaiako, to engage and to really think about those shifts in their own teaching and learning for all learners. I'm also just going to call out some of the barriers that I guess we've identified and are probably system barriers, and just finish with some a video from our Common Practice Model Inclusive Practices group. Just to sort of set the scene, as we embarked upon the work with the refresh of the New Zealand curriculum, one of the challenges has been to really take some of the overarching expectations of what our curriculum needs to be, to think about what, if we're talking about an inclusive curriculum, how do we take that from being words on a page? And so we did quite a lot of deep diving really around understanding what inclusive curriculum means, what's different, what are the challenges, what are the shifts that are needed. Sorry, I've got rogue slides here. Sorry. One of the things that we talk about is an inclusive education system, and I think some of our learning and the important positioning of curriculum and pedagogy and assessment, and how schools design their local school or their classroom curriculum, is really at the heart of working towards and moving towards a really truly inclusive education system. So that's how we've really tried to position Te Mātaiaho as a powerful vehicle and a powerful lever for system change. We know that there are other parts in the system. We have policy, we have operational, we have resourcing, and quite often they're talked about in siloed perspectives. So we are constantly working really hard to position the opportunity through Te Mātaiaho for schools to really interrogate their own learning and practice and journey. So the focus is truly on all learners. We also looked really carefully about what an inclusive curriculum means. And this is taken from some of the OECD work on adapting curriculum and to bridge equity gaps, and talks about different curriculum design paradigms. And it takes that shift from, I guess, that equity base to thinking about it from an inclusive curriculum from the outset. So the language that you would see in Te Mātaiaho really focuses on understanding the diverse needs, characteristics, abilities, and the high expectations, but importantly about identifying and thinking about the removal of barriers that we have, whether they're system barriers, but importantly from a curriculum point of view, what are some of the barriers that we have that exist in our schools and with our teachers as well, and calling out some of those in terms of biases and discrimination. Also through Te Mātaiaho, there is a much stronger emphasis on belonging and well-being, and you would have seen that. In doing this and talking about this, and I've drawn from some research. I've also drawn from colleague Jude MacArthur, who's online, and Jude was really influential in our Te Mātaiaho reference group, brought together to really look at that early design thinking, to really position the shifts towards an inclusive education system through inclusive curriculum, and calling out some of those current barriers and shifts, and that helped to shape some of the language. And I think Frian may have touched upon that as well, but the focus around the barriers and that currently exist within our sector is, or within our schools, is some of the language that we use. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge, I think. How do we move away from the labeling, the naming of young people, you know, learning support needs, special education needs? That language still exists, and I think it challenges all of us to shift that without minimizing the visibility of those learners. It also has perpetuated the fact that for these learners, something different and separate is needed because the curriculum isn't able to meet their needs. And through Te Mātaiaho, we've worked really hard to thread that focus of designing for all learners from the outside all the way through. And I'll briefly just unpack that on the next slide. What also exists, and this is much more of a system barrier, that the twin track, quite often when we talk about inclusive education, the default has been to go towards learning support. So in Te Mātaiaho, we've really tried to position our focus around inclusion, diversity, around all learners, calling out the diverse languages, identities, cultures that exist. And we've had to work really hard at not labeling, not listing, even though there was quite a lot of expectation from different groups and communities that we specifically call out groups. But as soon as you do that, you miss someone out, and then you create that othering focus. The situation of problems lying within the learner, and this has been a really important focus to shift away from teachers being adaptive and responsive practitioners, to really look and reflect upon their own practice and see the progress of all learners as being their responsibility, knowing that all learners bring something different to that learning. And so through the essential pedagogies that sit within Te Mātaiaho, we've really tried to think about that language of the problem doesn't lie within the learner. It's about how teachers recognize and notice and then respond to learners to ensure progress. We also know that what sits alongside of some of these barriers is some of the historical deficit theorizing, low expectations that go with a range of learners that we have. And we've seen this through numerous reports. We've seen that through the report from the Ministerial Advisory Group that called that out, particularly for our Māori, Pacific and disabled learners. We've seen that in recent AERO evaluations. as well for disabled learners, and also for learners coming from different ethnic cultures and communities. So again, through Te Mātaiaho, we've really tried to think about positioning the high expectations for all, which is one of our key principles. And also the perspective that young people need to fit our curriculum rather than a curriculum that is designed for the needs of learners as well. So when we looked at some of these barriers and drew those from the research, it really helped shape, well, what's some of the messaging and the language and the direction that we need to be positioning to start to move away and address some of those particular barriers. What I'm really quickly going to do, and this should be really familiar to you, it's the framework, the whakapapa for Te Mātaiaho. As the beauty of this framework is that it's designed to connect each of the components, starting with Mātairangi, starting with the overarching kaupapa, which really calls out the intention of the curriculum to think about all learners, to think about the diversity of all learners, to think about the abilities and strengths and interests of all learners from the outset. It also references the UN obligations that we have through our UN conventions as well, much more explicitly. As we move through into Mātainuku, the key principles within Mātainuku, and these should be pretty familiar to you. There's been a little bit of tightening of those before the next version comes out very shortly. But these three key principles are really pivotal, and you will, if you look closely through Te Mātaiaho, and then as we look at some of the early work in the common practice model, they are really designed these principles to be enacted. And as Frian was talking about enabling good lives, what we've done as we've been working through this is to run the EGL ruler over a lot of our work and identify where those EGL principles are visible through this current work. They may not say EGL principles, but we are pretty confident that what we've done, particularly with the principles, you would be able to see explicitly where those EGL principles are visible. So the holding a broad view of success, really acknowledging that all learners achieve and succeed, the focus on high expectations for every learner. And again, having that explicit, and also with some calls to actions for school leaders that talk to how they support their teachers to start to think about removing of barriers for all learners, to start thinking about how they set those conditions up. As we move through Mātai Tipu, the vision for young people, I won't say too much about that, but again, if you were to run an EGL ruler over that vision, I'm sure very easily you would see the expression of those principles through the vision that was Mātai Tipu, written by young people. Coming around as we talk about Mātai Reo is around the progressions. This has probably been the most challenging, and I think will continue to be the most challenging for teachers to think about progress in a different way, and to think about identifying what learning looks like and different starting points for learners as well. And so that also talks to the work that we need to do as a ministry around the supports and resources and the examples in this space. But Mātaiaho is really about the valuing of all learners, the valuing of all learning, and knowing that students will progress in different ways and demonstrate their learning in different ways. And as we move around to the why, Mātaiaho and Mātaiaho, if you look at the that focus around giving some guidance and directions for schools as they're thinking about their local curriculum. Again, we've really worked hard with some key questions for thinking about what good looks like, to give some indication of what schools need to be thinking about when they're designing for all learners from the outset. And again, I'm hopeful that if you look at some of the EGL principles, you would see that pretty clearly. The other part of this, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but in Mātaiaho, there is the refresh of what was the effective pedagogy statement in the NZC curriculum, the previous NZC, and the language around these pedagogies has really shifted, really aimed to bridge the gap between assessment and pedagogy, but it calls out the essential pedagogies. It calls out as the overarching pedagogy, teachers being an adaptive practitioner, adaptive teacher. So to be able to adapt their learning and think about their learning and think about their teaching based upon the learners in their classroom, and to base that on that really strong focus on what they're seeing, how they're responding to their learners. You will also notice that there is a particular focus on designing for inclusion that calls out probably what would be seen within the UDL principles and frameworks. And again, encouraging and thinking about that, having inclusive design thinking as part of those essential pedagogies as well. So if you have the opportunity, and you probably have engaged with Te Mātaiaho through various other forums, I think the focus that we've tried to have is to really embed that strong lens around inclusion, inclusive thinking right from the beginning. I'm sure as we keep iterating, or if there are other iterations, there will be stronger language and stronger focus as well. But we've certainly received some really positive feedback as we've gone out for testing, that schools, teachers, communities can see the focus around inclusion and inclusive thinking with what they're seeing in Te Mātaiaho. So we're not resting on laurels. We're saying, I think we've got a pretty good starting point. Personally, there was some stage I never thought in my long life that I would even see some of this language so explicit and so focused, and thought to be thinking about designing for inclusion from the outset. But for me, this is probably the starting point of how we support our kaiako to be thinking about this, to be challenging some preconceived notions that get in the way. And the role of the ministry, importantly, is to be thinking about how they're designing with all of the resources, with PLD, with everything that's coming through. How are we designing for diversity and equity and inclusion from the outset? So we are just starting some work on that across all of our groups, to look at a stock take, and then to look at some consistent framings and guidance for our staff to be thinking about that. Because at the moment, I would probably say becomes a bit of a retrofit. You sort of design as you usually design and then go, oh, we maybe haven't thought about the diversity of learners enough. So again, that's a real shift for us within the ministry working in this space, as it's a shift for all of our our school leaders, our kaiako, our whānau, but it's also a shift for you in ITEs as well. How do you start thinking about that and supporting your teachers? Okay, so I'm just going to do, in finishing up, I'm just going to do a very, very short focus around the common practice model. Some of you may have had some opportunity to engage with some of the early work on this. This is a key action within the literacy and communication and maths strategies. It's designed to really enact the some of the key focus within Mātaiaho, particularly around progress and also the essential pedagogies. Again, I'm not going to go into lots of detail around this, but just to signal the focus that's been taken on working on the common practice model has been thinking about all learners. So the language that has been used, the examples that are used, really call out the different ways that learners communicate, the different ways that learners will and can engage in different activities, and the focus on their literacy and communication and maths. To support us in doing that, we've had a group come together, and this is again part of our thinking about designing for inclusion from the outset, not to go, here we've got the practices, can someone have a look at this to make sure we've covered all bases. But we were able to bring together really a group across different parts of the sector to provide their expertise and around the diverse lens that they bring. We had people with lived experience of disability, we had whānau, we had lived experience of neurodiversity, we had people who were thinking about it from young people coming from different ethnic backgrounds and cultures, from Pacific, from gifted. So what I'm going to share is a video of members of the group talking about the work that they've been engaged with as well. So thank you.
It's a real privilege to be part of this inclusive focus group. There are people who represent lived experience. We have whānau voice, we have practitioners who I guess are specialists in their fields, and we all have this real common passion for greater inclusion for our learners and having a common practice model that is inclusive for every child. A wonderful thing we've been able to do is really think about the words and the languaging around inclusion. Think of the strengths-based lens, the more positive lens for how we can be catering and supporting our learners with diverse needs.
I see teaching like wayfaring navigation, where we're navigating on a waka, and at the base of the waka we have our treaty partners, but then sitting in that waka there's a huge wide variety of learning needs. They all need a seat that they feel comfortable in.
For Akonga, like my daughter who doesn't speak and has a form of communication that is different to most, it means that she is able to participate and be visible in a classroom, and that people get to know her, not just as someone they see around, but someone who can contribute.
I've got a lot of friends who you know, got diagnosed with autism or ADHD or dyslexia or whatever in like year 13. And they're like, my whole school career was ruined because I couldn't learn anything, but my needs weren't recognised. And so that's closed all sorts of doors for me. And I think the thing is, hopefully having this inclusive lens will mean that it's not so much relying on we support the people who have a diagnosis. It's about ensuring that there's room for everyone in that curriculum.
You know, where are our bilingual communities heading? What does our curriculum have that makes the different pathways for our communities seamless? What are the barriers? How can we, you know, make our communities more connected and involved in their children's education?
Inclusion for me looks like when I walk into a classroom that everyone is engaged in the same activity. There's the blind and low vision student may have their technology working in front of them. They're using that in front of them. There may be a student over here with some other learning needs and they're using their assistive technology to support them in their learning. So inclusion doesn't matter what or how anyone is learning, but they're all learning the same.
Embedding inclusive language into our teaching of literacy, communication and maths means it's not just an extra thing you have to do alongside teaching a curriculum. It's actually just part of your natural teaching. You know, I think inclusively by thinking about all my learners, really knowing my learner, and then I embed that into my design of my classroom.
It's amazing how much you find out and how much you feel you can relate to that student on a deeper level if you really talk to them. So it's teachers, you know, welcoming students by name, using, you know, correct pronunciation, and encouraging the whole classroom to be hospitable to each other, because it's a very enriching experience that we all have if that's the case.
It will actually lead to a school system where everyone feels included and where everyone's needs are met, and where people get to their end and they go, actually, I did get the chance to learn the literacy, communication and math skills that I need to thrive.
I never knew that othering could be something that would be removed, and that a fully inclusive education system could be a possibility in the future. So that's something that's really exciting to me.
What I'd really love to see in the future is NZSL celebrated, appreciated, learned around in the community so that it can be used by all.
In my gifted education journey, I've taught many students that have gone on to do very well. And I'd like to see more of our kids succeeding. And hopefully through this inclusive practices group model, that will start an avalanche of change, and positive change at that.
I hope you can hear me. I couldn't hear it, but that's okay. I've heard it many times. So I'm pleased you're able to hear that. I guess for me, the big takeaway from that, and I guess the comment that really resonates with me, but also provides the biggest challenge, is Rebecca's last commentary when she talks about that she never thought that she would experience anything else than othering, and the possibility and her hope around a truly inclusive education system becomes more evident through some of the work that she's been involved with through the common practice model. And I think for me that lays down the challenge and the responsibility that we all have in our different roles, that it's a really collective and collaborative effort that we need, and how we work together to ensure we're talking about the same thing, we're working in that same direction, we're thinking about how our language, how our intent is really starting to minimize, reduce, get rid of those barriers. And I think the role of ITEs, the work that the Teaching Council will be engaging on in partnership with others around the Inclusive Education Competency Framework is going to be a really powerful way to start moving away from some of our current system and reducing barriers as well. So I'm going to finish with that, to actually think about the roles that we all have to play. And for me, I keep Rebecca's commentary front of mind all the time in that space. So, and we've shared that video a lot with our ministry colleagues as well. And so it becomes a challenge for all of us about how we start to do this within our respective work. So I'm going to pause and stop now, Kelly. Hopefully that timing worked okay, and there's still time for breakout and for chat. So thank you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Kia ora, Julie. Ko Jocelyn Pollock tukuinga. That was really great. Hearing that really strong connection between Te Mātaiaho and the enabling good lives, and schools taking that responsibility for designing their classroom curriculum, being enabling or disabling, and that whole idea of all our learners, all our konga thriving. It really came through there. So thank you for that. We are going to go into breakout rooms now. We're going to have about 10 minutes rather than the 20 that's on the screen. I'm sure there is so much that you can take from both our all our speakers today. So looking at the provocation, have a read of that. And particularly with that focus on the barriers to inclusive, and thinking, small and big lenses, and who you think you can collaborate with. Okay, so very shortly, I think we are going to disappear into our rooms.
Kia ora koutou. Hopefully everyone's made it back safely from their breakout spaces. We're just going to finish off our session today with not so much a feedback session, but just an opportunity for you to pop into the chat function at the bottom of your screen, just see a little chat box. And if you could just pop in there your takeaways from today, anything that you found interesting, compelling, or maybe challenging, or any questions that you may still have. While you do that, we're going to have a look at a video. Now, the first video we watched in this next one is actually from the Refresh TKI site for the Ministry of Education. So if you haven't been and had a look in the last couple of weeks, I really encourage you to go and have a look at these, because there's some new modules that they've put up, and a whole heap of resources are nicely collated, I guess, into some really easy ways to find them. So yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I'm going to let you now just have a wee think. Pop your thoughts down in the chat, and that will also be shared, of course, afterwards, and then we'll finish off our session with a karakia.
We're doing fine compared to somebody else, right? But that's not, who cares, right? What we really want to know is, have we developed your kid's potential to its fullest, period. So I'm Todd Rose. I'm the director of the Mind, Brain, and Education program at Harvard, and I am the co-founder and president of the Center for Individual Opportunity. In a nutshell, like what we do is we are focused on the personalization of society.
Our educational system was one size fits all because our jobs were basically the same.
Getting away from one size fits all view of people and the systems that we build around that, and trying to get to something that's far more personal and helps develop the potential of every single person.
Students who don't fit or lose interest fall behind. Each year, over 1 million kids will drop out. Of those, an estimated 50,000 are highly gifted.
You know, it's nice that I'm a professor at Harvard and some other things, but I also like failed out of high school, like pretty spectacularly, really. I had a 0.9 GPA, and I didn't quite fail. They actually kicked me out, right? So I like fail because it makes it seem like I had some choice. And I ended up on welfare, had 2 kids, working minimum wage jobs when I was 19, and needed a different life. And I did still have this sort of weird belief in the power of education to transform lives and life circumstances. And so I got my GED and went to college at night. And I slowly built up a different view of myself, both as a learner and as a person, and what I was capable of. I had always assumed that I'd be a neurologist. After that, I thought, okay, then I realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. And Harvard had started a brand new program called the Mind, Brain, and Education program. And so I thought, I didn't know where Harvard was. I actually could never have pointed out on a map, but I wanted to be there. And I actually ended up getting into the program. That's the program I'm the director of now. The professional aspect of this was that I knew that the sort of standardized approach to success didn't really work for me, and that I had to carve off my own kind of path. But when I got to Harvard, it was during a period of time when science was changing pretty dramatically. I was working at Mass General Hospital, watching changes in medicine, in neuroscience, in nutrition, where we were getting away from one size fits all and really starting to look at personalization of things based on a new kind of science. And so it was that moment where I realized, well, wait a minute, this applies deeply to education and the workplace and human potential in general. So that really kickstarted this whole path that I'm on right now. The end of average for education means that it is unacceptable to design learning environments assuming most kids are like an average kid, right? Because it turns out scientifically, mathematically, there actually isn't such a person. It's just an empty middle. They don't exist. And so you've designed textbooks and curricular materials and assessments that fit actually nobody at all. And then kids muddle through, and then we reward the ones that muddle through the best, with better grades, all the while thinking we're actually nurturing their potential, and we're not. One of the mistakes I think we're making in education is to view personalized learning as another fad, but it's not. I mean, it's something bigger than that. There's something stirring in society. We're getting away from one size fits all and focusing on systems that really try to understand who you are and help develop you to your full potential. We have to show that this is a complete rethink of ourselves as a society, and then position education as part of that. For me, things like character development have lost ground in education, and they should be front and center. But the only way we get to do that is if we're really good at meeting every kid where they're at and giving them what they need to develop that broader range of skills and abilities and knowledge.
Kia ora, everyone. It's been great to read the comments that have been coming through during that video. From the discussion about the fact that shifting classroom practices are not enough, we need to shift whole school cultures to become inclusive and enable learning for all students. So what that means in terms of the supporting for teachers actually in their classroom from the wider school and from those connections to wider community. And agree, everybody, I like that idea to feel optimistic about the future and where we are heading, and the recognition that it is going to take a collective effort. to get there. It is my job now to also just make some threads between all three of our great speakers today, Dane, Julie and Frian. Thank you. It's been great to hear you speak about the need to start with the learner and what their aspirations are, that we need to make sure that we don't assume that a disability means that the student needs low risk. That we start with aspirations when designing curriculum, and that's also at the heart of localised curriculum and putting students at the centre. That also the removal of barriers needs to occur so that curriculum is strength-based and celebrates diversity in a really broad version of success. And so when I think about that and I consider the words like optimism that was coming through the chat, that is definitely the feeling that I have taken away from today's presentation as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and joining with us on this kōrero, being part of this journey and supporting our future teachers and their ākonga to thrive and be their best selves. Maya is going to release the poll very soon, but I'm going to remind you that the slide notes are going to be collated and sent out to you in the next couple of days. I would also like to just point out that on the slide at the moment, there is a link to our upcoming ITE symposia on October 18th, November 29th, and December 6th, when there's going to be an end-of-year provider hui and a chance to get together and chat about all that we have learnt and discussed this year. I'm now going to pass on to Bill, who is going to do our closing karakia while we also do our end poll, and you let us know how helpful you have found today's session. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, thank you, Kim. I think we'll wait until the poll has finished and we've got the result, and then we'll do the karakia. Excellent, excellent. So it sounds like we've hit the mark there. I also want to acknowledge before we finish, thank you to our language interpreters. Thank you to the council team, people in the background who've done such great work in setting this up. Kelly, you in particular. And now we have our karakia whakakapi. Kua e ki runga, kua e ki raro, I rongo whakahirahia ki runga ki tina. Tina, homie, hui, tai ki e. Go well, everybody. Best wishes for the rest of your day.